So, let's talk about something pretty intense. The US State Department made this huge decision to actually revoke people's visas because of what they posted online. We're talking about posts that celebrated violence against a political figure. We're going to get into how this single incident really pulls back the curtain on national security, free speech, and just how divided things have gotten. Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get right into the specific incident that kicked this whole thing off. Then, we'll dig into the government's justification for what they did. After that, we'll explore the big constitutional debate that blew up around free speech. And to wrap it all up, we'll zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the cultural context where all this is happening. All right, let's start at the very beginning. What's the event that actually triggered this entire firestorm? Well, this quote from the US State Department pretty much says it all, doesn't it? It's blunt, it's direct, and it lays out their whole argument right from the start. Being in the US is a form of hospitality, and if you cross a certain line, that invitation can be taken back. So what was the specific action? It was the revocation of visas for 6 foreign nationals. And the reason given was their activity on social media, which the State Department basically said was celebrating or glorifying an assassination. And you know, this wasn't just a localized thing. The department made it a point to publicly identify where these individuals were from: Argentina, Brazil, Germany, Mexico, Paraguay, and South Africa. They were making it crystal clear this was a global policy statement. So how exactly did they justify this move? Let's take a look at the core arguments that were put forward for yanking those visas. The whole argument really hangs on this one key distinction. For anyone who isn't a US citizen, being in the country is framed as a privilege, not a right. And of course, a privilege by its very nature is something that can be taken away. This quote really gets to the heart of it, drawing a moral line in the sand. The case being made here isn't about shutting down political opinions you don't like. It's about responding to the act of cheering on violence. That's positioned as something that's just not acceptable for any guest in the country. But here's the thing. This wasn't really just about punishing 6 people. By going public with this, the government was firing a warning shot, sending a message to everyone else. Your online speech can have very serious real-world consequences if you're a non-citizen who wants to be in the US. Of course, you can't make a move like this without stirring things up. It immediately kicked off a really complex and pretty heated debate about the limits of free speech, especially when it comes to people who aren't citizens. So on one side, you've got people like the writer Brad Palumbo. His argument is essentially that even if the speech is awful, if it's technically protected under the First Amendment, then taking away a legal resident's visa for saying it is just unconstitutional, period. But then you have the other side. Attorney Ryan Mullally points out that this is a huge legal gray area. He argues that while yes, non-citizens do have some First Amendment protections, the law is actually super unclear about how far those rights go, particularly when they bump up against immigration law. So really, it all boils down to this fundamental tension. On one hand, you have the sovereign right of a country to control who comes in and out, to protect its national interests. But on the other hand, you have these very legitimate worries about the constitutional rights of people who are here legally and the real danger that these powers could be weaponized for political reasons. And this is where the story gets so much bigger. The argument presented is that this whole visa incident, it's not some random isolated event. It's actually a symptom of a much deeper, more volatile divide happening in the country. And to explain this divide, this really interesting concept is introduced: the permission structure for violence. It's a fancy term, but the idea is simple. It's about how this constant, dehumanizing political talk can create an environment where violence against the other side starts to feel, well, acceptable, maybe even normal. And if you need a stark, kind of chilling example of that permission structure in action, look no further than this quote from a protester. It just shows how, for some people, political opposition has moved way past disagreement and into a place of actively wishing for an opponent's death. And to build this case even further, a whole list of specific and frankly shocking actions from various protests are brought up. The argument is that these aren't just expressions of political anger. They're acts that actively celebrate and even simulate violence, which just reinforces that whole permission structure we were talking about. Now, recognizing how a power like this could easily be abused, 4 sensible steps are proposed to act as guardrails. The idea is to create a system that lets the government act against the celebration of violence, but that also builds in protections like transparency and a process for appeals to stop it from just becoming a political tool. And in the end, this whole complicated mess comes back to this one single fundamental question. There is no easy answer here, but it forces us all to think about where a society should draw the line to protect both its own security and the freedoms it's built on.